Dr. Hassan Harris here from Citizens NYC, here on opening day for All In for NYC Week. So excited. This is the first time that we are launching Days of Action across the city. Today, I'm here in Bronx Sunshine Garden, and we are giving out food, handing out masks and hand sanitizer, and helping the garden by cleaning it up and making sure it's a safe space for folks to come together. Much needed in this time when folks have been socially distanced for so long.
My name is Jean Hill. I'm the president of the Tracy Towers Tenant Organization. We have a large community here. We have 2 big buildings. So we try to bring things in, and particularly since the pandemic, to help the community. It's neighbors helping neighbors. You know, we don't live in the world by ourselves. We live in a world where we're all connected to each other. Now we live in a global community, whereas before we only had to contend with the people, say, in your particular neighborhood, but it's become much larger than that.
We are asking folks to tag us, all their different actions that are happening in their very community. At Citizens Committee, hashtag All In for NYC is how we're going to be able to see what you're doing in all the 5 boroughs, and we're awarding 5 awards of $500 to represent all the great actions that are happening across the 5 boroughs of New York City.
I love working with our grantee partners because it's always great to see works in action, going to the neighborhoods, talking to real New Yorkers and hear their stories and see the action firsthand.
Well, my name is Bobby Akuma, and I'm the president for Dare to Dream. We use soccer to mentor youth. We use soccer as the point of interest. And some of the programs that we provide for them is after-school soccer clinics, homework assistance for math, science, and writing. In terms of the food program, I started doing it when the pandemic happened because I noticed that the food insecurity in the Bronx was really high. But the pandemic kind of took the blanket off where we noticed that the underserved community were really suffering. Since the pandemic started, we have given out about 20,000 food to people, and we're still doing it. Today we're in Tracy Towers, and I came to Tracy Towers because I grew up here. People are suffering. A lot of people don't have access to food, and most of them don't even know the resources that they need or how to even go about getting it. So what I do is whatever resource I have available on network, I use that to get the food and bring it to them. Whether it's me applying for a grant and getting it, then I use the money to purchase the food and bring it. Most of the foods that I'm giving out today came from a grant that was awarded to me by Citizens Community. So I use some of that money to purchase the food so that we could have ample and give it out today. We have to build the community ourselves. We can't sit there and wait for a politician or some sort of a community leader to do it. It has to come from within. And me growing up over here, I knew that the need is there. It's just a matter of when I was going to start the effort to do it.
We are the ones that are going to solve our problems. We're going to make New York City more equitable. We're going to make it sustainable. We're going to make it just and prosperous for all people by bringing all people to the table together.
Good afternoon. My name is Paige Travis here with Citizens Committee for New York City, and we're so glad that you're joining us here today for the relaunch of our Citizens NYC Live Rethink and Rebuild program. Welcome. We've been up to quite a bit here at Citizens NYC over the past few months, but we're glad to relaunch today with some exciting news. Our grant applications officially reopened this week. As you may know, we offer 2 core grant programs. The first is our All-In Neighborhood Grant Program. Since its founding years, Citizens NYC has been awarding microgrants to resident-led groups to improve the quality of life in their communities. We invest in neighborhood-led efforts to build a New York City that benefits all, such as efforts to boost civic engagement, neighborhood wealth, and community health. This grant supports projects in the arts, health, environmental justice, beautification, tenants' rights, and a lot more. We're also accepting applications for our relatively new Neighborhood Business Grant Program starting later this month. We at Citizens believe small businesses are vital to the fabric of their neighborhoods. We're awarding grants of up to $10,000 to New York-owned and operated small businesses. Businesses owned by people of color, immigrants, and women, and businesses that have the greatest need and minimal access to resources will be prioritized. Please make a note that we have a rolling application deadline for both of the programs. So the earlier that you apply, the better chance you have to secure funding. All you have to do is head to citizensnyc.org/grantmaking to learn more about both of our grant programs and to find out how to apply. And just in case you missed it, last month, we hosted an incredible Ideas Summit as part of our All In for NYC Week of Action. For today's Rethink and Rebuild discussion, we've pulled together highlights from the summit to share with you. So sit back, grab a notepad, and enjoy. We'll be right back.
This is incredible. Don't call it a comeback. We've been here for years. Wait, so the inside joke is I had the honor and pleasure of being on a panel on value volunteerism with most of these folks on this panel. One of these kids is new, but we're really excited to have a conversations of like how to be in partnership and bringing back New York City. What is the role of organizations and corporations working with community to bring New York City back? It was a fantastic town hall that was hosted by New York Cares, my friend Gary Bagley. And we are going to talk a little bit more about what we're seeing, what can be done, and what's the role of volunteering in making a healthy New York. So we're going to start with brief introductions, and then I'll get into the first question. So Gary, could you introduce yourself, please?
Always. I'm Gary Bagley. I'm the executive director of New York Cares, and I have the pleasure of having partnered and worked with everybody on this call, except Barlow, you're new to me. I'm eager to learn more. I do want to point out we've all been sitting in exactly the same place since May. This shot will be identical to the one we sent out at the end of May. So I just want to know you all got up, ate, showered, did something between now and then. Anyway. Shall I pass it on to Joan Steinberg?
You know what? That's what I was going to do. So this is perfect. So each one pass it on. Go ahead.
Okay, so I'm in a new environment and I'm moving offices. So I don't know if you guys can see. I can't figure out which way to lean. So I apologize for my background. I do not have a carefully staged ensemble behind me like you, Rasan. I'm Joan Steinberg. I'm president of the Morgan Stanley Foundation, and I'm the head of global philanthropy for Morgan Stanley, including volunteering. So looking forward to part 2. Melva, I'm going to turn it over to you, my partner in crime from the last one.
Awesome. Amazing. Thank you so much, Joan. And it is my pleasure to be here once again with the crew, Rasan and both Gary and Barlow. Welcome to the gang in the best sense of the word. But my name is Melvin Miller. I am the CEO of the Association for a Better New York. And this is our 50th year, basically volunteering for the betterment of the city. And we are excited to be a part of the recovery of New York City along with the rest of my partners on this call. And we're going to talk more about that later. So thank you, everyone, and welcome. And I guess I'm passing it on to Barlow.
It comes to me. Ball comes this way, right? Okay, tag me in. Good morning, everyone. I'm Barlow Flores. I'm representing City. I'm the new Senior Vice President for Community Relations, leading community relations for what we call the Northeast region, which consists of New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Delaware, Connecticut, and Massachusetts. I think I've got all the states here. I was counting on one finger. So recently joined City about 2 months ago. I think I hit the 60-day mark. So I know I have a ton of institutional knowledge, as I've told Rasan many times. So I'm excited to be here with this great crew. And I'll toss it back over to you, Rasan.
Great. So I'm not pulling a Drake, no new friends kind of situation. Barlow, you can come on in. Come on in. So I'll say the why of this panel, and then I'll let my panelists get into it. So I really understand, because it's in our mission, that together we improve New York City. And I'm so excited to have partners that are running associations, nonprofit organizations, or part of corporations that really care about the health of New York City, and understanding what they're seeing, how volunteerism and bringing people together is so important for recovery is something that I would like the audience to hear. And we'll see how folks can contribute. And the first question, and we'll go in the same order. Gary, like, what are you observing in New York City this fall at this phase of the pandemic? And how do you think volunteerism can impact, what we're seeing?
I think one thing that's really been interesting is I've been reading a bit lately of the impact of fatigue on all of us. And I think, whether we are facing persistent challenges in our community, whether we're facing just the persistent personal challenge of a lack of change that's been going on for 19 months, I think we're all feeling that energy. We're all a little bit afraid to get back out into big public settings just because we haven't done it for a while. And so, one thing I've been thinking about quite a lot is how the change or the need is unchanging right now. If anything, it's increasing. We're really starting to experience questions of learning loss, persistent food insecurity. That 19 months ago, we said we expected to last for maybe 2 years, and we're starting to look at 2 years. So I'm seeing all of that. And then I will say, and everybody here knows, I'm a diehard optimist. I do see people continuing to step up, right? I continue to see the good work and people walking through that challenge. And that's happening both individually. And I'd say I'm starting to see it in the system, right? I'm starting to see the city. I'm starting to see the nonprofit sector. I'm starting to see corporations say, okay, enough of this not being able to show up. We're going to figure out how to do that, not wait for the right time to do that. So that's kind of what I'm both personally feeling and I'm seeing through the work at New York Cares.
No, I love that. I'm a father. I have a 7-year-old, and learning loss is real in this household. And there was a joy of getting her back to 5 days a week in school, but there's still precautions you need to take, and so that's one specific example, and I'm sure everyone in their different aspects of their lives are going through hope, but also caution. But definitely, we also always persevere to find ways to move forward. Joan, what are you seeing?
I'm going to build off of what Gary said. I'm not known for being an optimist, so this is rather amusing. I'm a skeptic. No, and I'm sure, Barlow, you're going to say the same with the employees, that you're seeing a little bit of a hybrid. You've got some people who are pushing to say, let's go, the whole team can go. And you have other people who are still that in-person thing. And, let's be honest, some of it is about the transportation to where you may end up. So there's a little bit of interest in doing things, but there's a lot of concern about where you're going to be. And I think we're just a little bit in a conundrum, because as a workplace, we're trying to encourage employees to come back to work. And we're putting a lot of rigor around what that means, right? You can't enter our building unless you can prove you're vaccinated. There's tons of safety precautions. So then the idea of but go out in the community where we're not 100% that it's going to be the same environment. So we're trying to create opportunities for people who are interested, with a little bit of this is risk you're taking, but we're trying to set it up. And I would say for the nonprofits listening, we're really looking for the partners that we have to be laying out for us, what are the protocols that you have in place? Because we feel a lot more confident if we're sending people and we know here's the steps you're going to take. Here's who can be involved in this. Here's the limits, whether it's a number of people or the environment, or you're outside or you're inside. So I think that the more that we can get clarity, and the more that their trusted partners who we know are sort of on their game on these things, the more comfortable we are. But I'm definitely seeing movement towards, we really want to be out, and we frankly want to be with each other, which is very different than what it previously was. And that, just to say, that's the move forward. And I think all of us need to be very comfortable that we're in the plan and cancel part of our lives, which has been going on for a long time. Yep. But at least the planning's happening. And right now we're hopefully entering another valley of COVID cases. So I'm like, get out now while you can. But I think that the backdrop behind this is also all of the virtual things we figured out during this break have given us some real tools that I hope will not go away. And those are much more skills-based and much more pro bono in their nature, because they can be. So, you know, for those who've kind of not gotten on the virtual bandwagon, you should still be doing it, even if we're going to open up and people are going to be able to come to you. I also think for those who are in the outer boroughs where it's always been harder to get folks from companies to kind of come, those virtual opportunities really create connection for you with employees who maybe don't live in those communities, and particularly now are not going to want to try to travel to them. So it's worth thinking about making an investment towards virtual opportunities and the technology. Maybe you need to do that.
I absolutely love that. You spoke to so many things that are real for Citizens Committee. So for those who don't know the story, my first day was March 16th. That was the day New York City shut down. My daughter was schooling at home. I almost get teary-eyed thinking about it again. And you had to pivot, and you had to learn how to do things that connected to people, because at our core and our mission is bringing people together, but bringing people together in a way that's safe was a non-negotiable. And so utilizing Zoom, utilizing Hopin, again, tag your friends, make sure they're getting on this thing. You know, using Facebook Live, LinkedIn Live are ways to connect folks. We had a survey that we put out in the midst of IDA that we wanted to know how people were, because recognizing what's the impact to infrastructure and to the way folks can show up, and the long-lasting effects of climate change. We had some volunteers come in and dial our grantee partners and other applicants to get them to pay attention to the survey. So the things that folks can do virtually that really make an impact and really help out. So I think you named a lot of the things. Virtual and skills-based are really important, and it all has to be done in a context with folks are comfortable with. Melva, talk.
Sure. Thanks, Rasan. So I'm going to build on what Gary and what both Gary and Joan said. You know, I think this is a really interesting time that we're seeing on the ground. You know, organizations and their employees are really trying to figure out how to maneuver at this phase of the crisis, right? Between returning to work, between childcare and school for their children, right? Rasan talked about that. Health safety measures for themselves and their families moving forward, right? What this pandemic meant for them, evolving their businesses, right? And their daily routines to adapt to the changing environment, talking about sort of the online tools and figuring out how to maneuver in the virtual space. And I just want to give a big shout out to Dawn Kelly. I see she's on here, small business owner who's really done a really good job sort of adapting in this environment. But, you know, there's really a lot of ways that we've seen our members and we've seen folks on the ground try to really maneuver at this stage, because, you know, every day is a new sort of exciting adventure in the world of COVID. And quite frankly, right, all of these mandates, especially those that produce stress and in the mental reality that the weather is getting colder, right? And the outdoor escapes and opportunities for relief from the pandemic will no longer be available. So, you know, really, you know, dealing with sort of the changes, the back to isolation conditions, and not to mention, right, recovering from Hurricane Ida, right, on top of all of this. So we've really, in our experience, we've seen people were more likely to volunteer when there has been an opportunity outside, right, over this last summer. And as we sort of transition into the fall, you know, we've seen, you know, a decline in how people are willing to sort of step up in the way that they did in the beginning of the pandemic. And also during the pandemic, which coincided with, the social unrest across the country, right? Acts of due to violence and discrimination against people of color and what's happening in the workplace with women. People were looking for a way to give back, especially while they were home. But now, we've seen people sort of trying to sort of deal with how they return to some sort of life that they knew before the pandemic. And it is sort of shifting the way we have seen sort of our members and others sort of give themselves in this moment. So that's really what we've been seeing sort of as we transition to the fall and weather's getting colder, how to sort of, participate and give back to the city's recovery in a way that sort of makes people feel comfortable.
Into it. I think our first question, I'll tee it over to you, Senator Krueger, is what are some of the efforts that you've seen work in this year's primary elections that proved engaging for your respective communities and constituencies? Even though you may not have been on the ballot, what are some things that you saw? And so I'd like to hear from Senator Krueger and then Laura Wood on that question first.
Great. Well, I'm going to actually point out that when it comes to elections, one of the really critical things is the press. And it's not just the big tabloids that everybody knows the names of. It's actually community newspapers. So it's perfect for me to be here with the Haitian Times because, in fact, people read their local community newspapers. They're often free and they're available all over their communities. And when they're writing about the local elected races, the ones smaller than mayor, public advocate, and city controller, sometimes that's the only media that a local election might get in the primary time, because we have the kind of elections in New York City where, because of our good campaign finance laws, you could have 10 people running in a primary, which means they're not going to get covered by the New York Times, the Post, or the Daily News, because they're not going to cover a 10-person primary for city council. And yet, at the local level, from a civic participation perspective, who your council member is and what they're doing on a day-to-day basis may make all the difference in the world about whether your community is getting their garbage picked up, whether your schools are actually responding to the needs of your students, whether you have responsive city government to crisis that might happen. And yet it's really hard for council candidates in a primary to get any attention, which is why the local community newspapers play such an important role. Letters to the editor of local community newspapers is one amazing way that people can be civically engaged. They write letters to the editor, they're going to get published. Maybe not in the New York Times or the Daily News, but they're going to get published in their local papers. So when they're talking about the issues that they care about and that they want attention to, that's a place to get that attention. Word of mouth is really important in local politics. That's always been said, that all politics is retail. And sometimes we think in a city of 8.5 million, what does that even mean? But it actually means, did you get to meet the candidate at your subway stop? If I find a candidate who says they've never stood on a street in New York City and tried to get the attention of strangers, I say, you don't even know what you're doing here. You have to go out and meet the people and talk to them one-on-one, retail style. That means showing up at the schools when parents are dropping their kids off or picking them up, showing up at the bus and subway stops at 7 in the morning or at 7 at night to talk to them. I know that because of COVID, everything got harder, but people were being really creative of using Zooms and other devices to do sort of presentations online, town halls online. Community boards often switched to online during COVID, and community boards are amazing ways to learn what matters in a community, what everybody's talking about, what they care about, and also to, during the public comment period, present your concerns. So I tell every candidate no matter whether they're running pretty much for president of the United States or their local district leader position, that you want to know your community and what really matters, you have to sit through 3 full community board meetings. And those community board meetings go on for hours, but you need to sit through them and understand what people are saying and caring about in your community if you think you're going to get their attention to try to represent them at some time. I'll stop there.
I love that. And Laura, I'd like to hear from you. Senator Krueger mentioned, the difficulties with COVID and people moving to a virtual environment. I'm curious to know how the city handled that in the midst of COVID. What are some of the engagement approaches that you took that you think will become mainstays going forward?
Yeah, well, I just want to first of all thank Senator Krueger for her very on-point comments. No surprise there, but really agree, especially with the point about the importance of the press and the media. COVID has obviously, it's had a huge impact on literally everything that we do. And we have tried to experiment with a number of different approaches over the last, 20 months now. We were actually in the middle of a special election when the pandemic hit the city and we went into lockdown. So it's been nonstop, trying to anticipate what will happen next. But one thing that we have done that I think has been very effective is, first of all, we have really emphasized the importance of partnering with community-based organizations and groups that, if whether they're literally on the ground or if it's a virtual thing, at least know various communities in New York City that we are trying to reach out to and work with. And back in June, or leading up to June, when we had obviously this incredibly important primary for our city's future, which featured for the first time at the city level a brand new system of voting, ranked choice voting. We partnered with organizations to do a couple of things. One was to make sure that we were reaching people for whom English is not their first language or who don't speak English at all. We really emphasized making sure that we had resources and materials available both in hard copy that we could distribute, but also, of course, electronically, digitally, in many languages. And we were fortunate through the resources of the city to be able to produce those materials. We had materials in up to 25 different languages. And one of the tools we actually thought was kind of fun. It was a tool called Ranked Vote, which was actually basically an app that would allow people to experiment with ranked choice voting from the comfort of their home, from their smartphone, wherever they were. And we partnered with groups to come up with sort of culturally relevant topics to vote on. Of course, it was all food because that's really what everyone cares about. But, what are the best Indian treats, or, where is the best Haitian food, that sort of thing. And so, and we had sample ballots in more than 25 languages that people could, play around with. And we got a huge number of impressions from that tool. I think it was over 85,000 clicks. So we think it had an impact. The other thing that we did was we partnered with artists, and this was also incredibly effective. We partnered through our partnership with the organization Naleo and the organization FYI. We got connected with a group called the Uptown Collective, and we launched a campaign entitled Neighborhoods Have Power. It featured images of actual New Yorkers, talking about why voting was important. And we had this incredible poet who wrote a poem about voting and Juneteenth, Fontarati. And so those are just some examples, but really tapping into the specific neighborhoods that you're trying to work with, working with the community groups that are already there, I think is one of the important lessons that we've learned.
Yeah, I think you're right. Some of the candidates we saw in Central Brooklyn certainly tried their best to leverage social media and do different things, through Facebook, Instagram, to just try to keep people engaged and get the word out. Dr. Summers, up in the Bronx, I'm curious to know if there's anything you saw there that you'd like to add that really worked. Then same for you, Dr. Camp, in a little bit.
Sure. Yeah, just briefly in the Bronx, what we saw was a lot of the folks that were running for elected office. They partner with a lot of community-based organizations like the Think Incubator to conduct town hall meetings to reach those particular constituencies. So in the case of, we had a very important election with Bronx Borough President race, where we had some really dynamic candidates running. And one of the things that we did at the Incubator was our young people. We are an organization that we're 14 to 24-year-olds. They hosted a Bronx Borough President's Forum. But we saw not just our organization do that, but other community-based organizations host special events, town halls, debates, conversations with, in order to reach their particular constituencies, in order for them to get to know more about the candidates that were running, particularly for the Bronx Borough President's office. So that was one of the things that we saw. And then, of course, I think Senator Kruger and Laura mentioned some of the things that we've seen in the borough, but social media was definitely a big part of a lot of what candidates were doing. And again, leveraging things like Zoom or Google Meets and Hangouts because of the pandemic. So those were a lot of what we saw. But those candidates going to different organizations, having these roundtables, having these debates were a really critical part of our election this past year.
Yeah, that's definitely true. we hosted some RSLs to try to get people to talk about these issues, these community forums, candidate forums, and they went over really well. Dr. Camp, what did you notice from this past experience in the spring?
Yeah, so I really like this question because you're asking about how to get people to turn out to vote. But the title of this panel has to do with voting and so much more. So I'm interested in the so much more. Think about the iceberg, how only about 10% of it is visible. That's something I would call the capital C civics versus the 90%, which is the day-to-day lowercase c civics. And so I think it's important to acknowledge the challenge that and the fear that people have been facing in the past year and a half, fear of even stepping outside. So what's it like to step outside, again, to live in a three-dimensional world? I think we're all kind of feeling this desire to reconnect. And so I'm interested in, I've been seeing a lot of opportunities for developing civic muscle, so to speak, and getting this healthy body politic. And so with Civic List and the Advocacy Academy, which I run at Teachers College, we do a lot of asset accounting to think about what are your strengths, what do you already have at your disposal, what are your community's assets, and then thinking about small scale actions, basically, what are your existing talents? As Laura mentioned, there's a lot of opportunities centered around food and art, and also gardening. These are small scale actions that we can all take to build community on a daily basis to kind of just step back outside into the three-dimensional world. And then voting isn't just necessarily this once every 4-year activity. You will hear more, you'll be around your neighbors more to understand that there are more issues at stake. And so, yeah, I would think about the small scale local activities. And that's a way to kind of build this civic muscle.
For people who don't know, my name is Gary Axelbank. I'm the host and senior producer of Bronx Talk and the Bronx Buzz on BronxNet Television. So I hope people who are watching us from the Bronx will at least know something about what I do. We've been doing it for a very long time. And we've got a panel here. First of all, I do want to thank the Citizens Committee of New York City for putting together All In for Community Health. And let's face it, who is not all in for community health? If you're not all in for community health, go to another city. We're done. Okay. I mean, sorry, I'm a Bronx boy. We're going to say what we think. And this is the V Squared Vaccines Violence panel for Black, Indigenous, people of color communities. So let's get right to it. I'm going to introduce our 3 guests. We'll start off with Heather Butts, who is the co-founder of HELTH. You can tell us what that stands for. We all know it stands for Health for Youth. It's a nonprofit which focuses on college readiness and preparation. HELTH partners with 53 programs yearly to help more than 4,000 students achieve college readiness. Professor Butts is on faculty at LIU Post and also in the healthcare and public arenas. So nice to have you with us, Professor Butts.
Hi, how are you? Nice to talk with you again.
Great.
After talking with you yesterday.
Yes, right. We got everybody prepared. Everybody's
right. You did. I'm impressed.
And then over there also is Lori Benson, who's the executive director and CEO in Hip Hop Public Health, which was a fascinating concept for me to learn about. They develop innovative health, fitness, and wellness programs to empower youth around the globe with the knowledge and skills to make healthier choices, reducing preventable health conditions and the rising tide of childhood obesity. Right in the thick of things here during pandemic time. Lori Rose Benson, nice to have you with us.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Gary, and a pleasure to be here with you, Heather and Joey.
You know, the third guest for me needs no introduction. We've been friends and colleagues for a very long time. I could read you his bio, but I could tell you he is TV's best legal commentator. You see him on CNN and all over, and MSNBC and all over the place. He's also probably New York's best defense attorney, but I'll give you the full bio for Joey Jackson, a nationally recognized attorney who has for over 2 decades represented individuals in labor unions in state and federal court. He represents a diverse group of clients under the glare of cameras, as well as those who have never attracted public attention. He represents clients who have fallen into high stakes personal and professional crises, as well as those who are average citizens in need of his fierce and benevolent counsel. Joey Jackson, nice to see you, my friend.
What an introduction, man.
I'm trying to follow that up. Anyway, let's.
You do great work. You are a child of the Bronx. You're a pillar of the community and are so well respected by so many. So it's good to be with you. And of course, my esteemed colleagues. I don't even know what I'm doing here when you see Lori Rose Benson and you see Heather Butts. My goodness, this is good stuff. So I'm just glad to be here. Thank you for
Let's get to it. Joey and I are part of the Mutual Admiration Society. Nonetheless, let's just start with Professor Butts.
Yes.
Obviously, you want to tell us a little bit about what HELTH for youth is.
That's an apple.
But I want to get right to it.
Okay.
Right now, you could turn on any TV, look at any newspaper, and the word mandate is there, and all of a sudden, some people are saying, "Well, we got to have mandates because we got to keep people safe." Other people are saying, "Don't tell me what to do," in plain Bronx language, out of my face, that kind of thing. And there's a cost to it because maybe we're not going to have as many teachers. Maybe we're not going to have as many healthcare professionals that we desperately need as a result of these mandates. So why don't you talk about your organization, if you would, and then put all of this in perspective. Where are we at? I mean, for goodness sakes, kids can't go to school without a measles vaccination. At this point, why not a COVID vaccination? That's my spiel. It's all you, Professor Butts.
I love it. That was a great segment. I will be brief because I definitely want to hear from my wonderful colleagues on the panel. The organization HEALTH stands for Health for Youths, and it is an acronym, as you alluded to, and it stands for Health, Education, Academic Life Skill Training, Help for Youths. Took a long time to come up with that one. But we're 12 years old, and the organization is a service provider for other nonprofits. So we work with 78 different youth nonprofits. The Citizens Committee is obviously a trusted partner of ours, and we work with about 4,000 young people a year. We mainly work with young people that are court involved, that are in foster care, that are homeless, that have been homeless. About 25% of our students are court involved or somewhere in the court system. So we do a lot of work to help them through the process and understand what their rights are, and then ultimately help young people to transition from wherever they are to college, the working world, and beyond. So that's what health does. During COVID, we have about 60 little free libraries throughout New York and New Jersey, and we transform them into food pantries to get food out to the community. So that's health. In my other life, when I'm not doing that, as you mentioned, I'm a law professor, and I'm specifically a health law professor. So I have a master's of public health degree from Harvard University in law and public health. I spent the last decade or more teaching around things like the 1918 flu and the Ebola crisis as it relates to mandates and as it relates to cases like an old-timey case called Jacobson v. Massachusetts, which we can talk about. But that's my area, is specifically public health law. And so before COVID, I was doing it. It's just nobody knew what it was. And when I set up a public health board, they were like, what? So
that's right. All of a sudden, all these things came to the fore. It was like, oh yeah, we really do need that.
Right, exactly. So with respect to mandates, so mandates are interesting. So as I mentioned, there's a case called Jacobson v. Massachusetts. It's a 1905 case and involved a man shockingly named Jacobson, who was from Sweden and didn't want to get the smallpox vaccination. And so for his troubles, he was fined $5 and incarcerated for not getting the vaccine. And at the time, the thought was, well, we need you to get this vaccine because in order to get up to herd immunity and for people to be safeguarded from smallpox, it's kind of imperative. So Jacobson v. Massachusetts is sort of the grandmother and grandfather and grand everything of civil liberties cases that intersect with public health law. Its progeny include Roe v. Wade and Davis v. Davis, and lots of other cases that we think about when we think about civil liberties and bodily intrusion. In terms of the mandates, usually the mandates are the states do this. So Jacobson also stands for something called police power, which doesn't have to do with NYPD, but has to do with the ability of an individual locality or state to be able to institute a law or some other regulation in order to safeguard its citizens. So Jacobson also allows for that. And that's how you have states and localities like New York City having the ability to create mandates, because under Jacobson, we're protecting the citizens of that particular area. And if deemed to be constitutional, then that's the way that states and local officials have the right to institute mandates. So that's the legal framework for it.
Okay, so here's the background. The legal framework, according to the way you just presented it, is that states, governments at whatever level you want, have the right to impose a mandate.
Right.
Okay, we'll accept that on its face. But right now, as we speak, there are protests all over the place. There's been violent incidents as a result of people saying, absolutely, you can't make me do this. Is this a misunderstanding of what America freedom means? And then along with that, I do want to ask you about the communities that were most affected by the pandemic. The numbers show it. In those communities of color, in many cases, those are the people who are saying, you can't make me. I mean, I can't balance it out. I can't deny that I myself would urge everybody to get vaccinated. It's part, and if it's being mandated and you want to work, you got to do it. But apparently there's people who don't agree with what I'm thinking.
Right. Okay. So I just want to talk about one other case, and then I will hand it off to my colleagues. So some of you may remember the Casey Hickox case. This is the case that involved a nurse who was serving in Western Africa during the Ebola crisis. She flew into Newark Airport and had the unfortunate timing of flying back to Newark Airport on October 24th. 2000 and just around the time that Governor Chris Christie had passed an executive order 164 detailing what needed to happen for people who had been serving in Sierra Leone and other Western African countries and trying to help people with Ebola. And the argument that Casey Hickox used was that her being forced to stay in Newark Airport for 80 hours under thought that she might have been exposed to Ebola was unreasonable and arbitrary, and that the governor and other officials were doing this basically infringing on her right. The courts in that case decided that it was not unreasonable to hold her, and in fact, she could have been held for longer. Could have been there for 21 days. But this goes to your question as to ultimately what you have to ask with these mandates is, are they unreasonable? Are they arbitrary? Is it arbitrary to force somebody to get the vaccine given what we've been going through? And I'm interested to talk with the rest of the panel about that, because that's the ultimate question is, and then there's certain things that I would say they may be unreasonable. We may get to a point where some of the infringements may be, a bridge too far. We may have already gotten there, and that's, I'm sure, what we're going to talk about. But the question you ultimately have to ask is, public health in this country follows a utilitarian model, the good of the many versus the good of the few. So are what people being asked to do and their civil liberty infringements, are they so far from that what they're being asked to do is beyond the good of the many? So I think that's the ultimate question you have to wonder. And in terms of the mandates and what people perceive to be infringement, are their rights being so infringed that it is unconstitutional?
Before I touch on another point with Neil, Charlotte, can you tell us how CDFIs are funded?
Yeah, I saw that question in the chat, and I think it's a great question as well. CDFIs receive subsidized government funding as well as bank funding. Most CDFIs are also nonprofit 501c3s, so they raise funds just like everybody else. We have to do the whole funder philanthropic game just like everybody else. I just wanted to harp on, go back to a point that Yen raised that I think is really, really valuable. That CDFIs are often seen as outside of the community, and what we're really pushing for is to put us inside the community to support efforts like Think Chinatown and help move those efforts forward. It's really important that we do connect and work together and use the funds that we have access to make sure that we are working for the same purpose and not generating opportunities that are not aligned with the community that we're trying to serve.
Thank you. You all need capes. You're all superheroes. And on that point, Neil, one of the 4 strategic initiatives at Trinity Church, Wall Street Philanthropies, focuses on housing and homelessness. Research published by New York University cited that recent work in sociology has shown that evictions play an important role in the lives of low-income renter households and may also contribute to poverty through cascading disruptive effects such as job loss, adverse health effects, and negative consequences for children. Please share how you and your team are working to counter these outcomes.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Our work to end mass homelessness sits alongside our work to end mass incarceration as our 2 racial justice initiatives at the Trinity Church. And to your point, if you're looking to reduce homelessness, a key way to do that is actually keeping people in their homes. Once families enter into the shelter system in New York City, they are losing easy access to education, to schools, to training, to jobs, to healthcare, and all of the knock-on effects that come from that. They may be in the shelter for months and months while looking for a new place to stay. And those impacts are actually generational, not just in terms of months. One of the leading predictors of being homeless as an adult is homelessness as a child. And I think COVID has been very revealing on evictions. We have obviously seen a significant increase in the number of families who are in perilous situations with regards to their housing, whether because loss of jobs, healthcare needs, and so forth. And we've also seen some real challenges in getting assistance to folks. And to the point we were just discussing earlier around language access, the rental assistance for tenants, one of the things Trinity has been supporting some of our grantees, groups like Chaya in Queens, is to provide translation services so that tenants can access those resources. and also advocacy to make the system better and to extend the eviction moratorium. And actually that advocacy has been successful. One of Governor Hochul's first acts was to extend the eviction moratorium to January and to improve the state rental assistance program. But I think what's also interesting about COVID is it gives us a window into how things can be different. The eviction lab at Princeton, which is run by Matthew Desmond, some of you may have read his book Evicted, which really catalogs the human impacts of the eviction system that we have in this country. They estimate that around 1.5 million eviction filings have been prevented due to the various eviction moratoriums. And if you just look in New York City and the Bronx, this year between January and September, there were 10,500 eviction filings. But you compare that to 2019, there were 65,000 eviction filings. So it really raises the question, or I think states the need to not return to where we were before and show that we can do things differently. And just one other note, which I think is very relevant to the conversation around wealth creation. This is not simply tenants versus landlords. In fact, one of the major methods of wealth creation in low-income and minority neighborhoods is home ownership. And a landlord who has a 2-3 unit building that is generating wealth and stability in that community. So we've been supporting the Center for New York City Neighborhoods. They have a program called the Mom and Pop Landlord Program, and is really designed to provide financial counseling, legal counseling, with the goal that both the tenants can stay in their units and the landlords can keep their homes.
Thank you, Neil. But one of the terms of financial counseling, I'd like you guys to weigh in. Do you think that folks that are in underserved communities can benefit from financial training and education from the beginning of school? A lot of folks don't have those families that can teach better financial skills. Trella, will you pick up on this? And
yeah, I think this is a complicated conversation, because there's also this assumption that particularly BIPOC communities don't understand finance, and that is not necessarily the case. Having an understanding of a system that is not readily available to you is different from your ability to understand finance. So yes, I definitely think that young people need to be trained on finance and how to balance a checkbook and, hold a budget for their households. And I think all of that's helpful. But the reality is that when we're grown and we have adulting issues, it's not as simple as that. And there are a lot of systems that require financial knowledge that we don't have access to on a regular basis. And so that's a very different conversation. I'm grateful that we have organizations like Trinity, NFF is in partnership with Trinity, for capacity building and opportunities to actually provide leaders with additional access and understanding about financial resources so that they can use and access various types of capital and not be limited to just the straight, only home ownership, only going to a bank and letting a bank tell them whatever, but giving them some more orientation to their own financial management and strengthening their opportunities to access capital.
Thank you. Speaking of intersections, Trella, will you be doing work with Citizens Committee?
We are currently working with Citizens Committee in a fantastic project called Rising Together, where we were able to support them, and they distributed grants to some nonprofit organizations, and then we are providing that same capacity building, which is our tie-in to Yin. So this is actually a pretty tight circle here that we have going on today, and that's what makes this panel so incredible. But it is all about our ability to engage in community, hear from the community what they need, respect the fact that we haven't always shown up in the best way, and so we've got to build trust. and not make assumptions that people don't know, but then give them the information that they don't know so they can make different choices. I think that's really crucial, and that's why I keep emphasizing this thing around connection.
Connection, there's a consistent theme today about asking the community what they want. But I'm going to flip that on its side for a hot minute. I'm going to play Oprah. It's like my dream, right? Trella, you get 100 million. Neil, you get 100 million. And Yin, you get 100 million. What long-term and you guys are close enough to your communities to be able to speak on their behalf. What long-term investments or programs would you create to increase wealth in underserved communities in greater New York City?
Well, maybe I'll pick up on actually another place where Nonprofit Finance Fund and Trinity are working together, which is really to support the finances of the nonprofit organizations that are directly engaged in and working in the community, supporting communities of color. These are nonprofits that are employing people of color. In many cases, although not enough, led by people of color. And we've been working with NFF to provide a loan fund to support some of Trinity's grantees that are doing that type of work. And what we've seen is that one of the leading reasons why those nonprofits need a loan is because of the severe delay in the city paying its contract. So the city is asking these nonprofits to provide services for the city, and then basically months and months go by until the nonprofits get the check. And it's estimated it's about 800 million that is owed. So unfortunately, your 100 million would only make a dent in that. But I think particularly as we look to a new mayor coming in, a new city controller, this is really a time to reform that system and make sure that the nonprofits that are active and engaged and working in communities across the city are actually paid for the work that they are doing.
It was so great to see a recap of that day and of the Idea Summit. Thanks again so much for joining us today for our watch party. Remember, CitizensNYC is here to help New Yorkers get back on their feet, and we're all in for NYC. Our grant applications officially reopened this week, so don't forget to sign up for our newsletter to get the latest updates and subscribe to our CitizensNYC Live platforms on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. We just launched our second season of our CitizensNYC Live Couples and Conversations podcast today as well. Reminder, we offer 2 core grant programs. Our All-In Neighborhood Grant Program is designed for neighborhood-led efforts such as efforts to boost civic engagement, neighborhood wealth, and community health. This grant supports projects in the arts, health, environmental justice, beautification, tenants' rights, and more. And our Neighborhood Business Grant Program will launch later this month. For that program, we're awarding grants of up to $10,000 to New York-owned and operated small businesses. Businesses owned by people of color, immigrants, and women, and businesses that have the greatest need and minimal access to resources will be prioritized. What is the application deadline for our grant programs, you ask? This is a rolling application. So we encourage you to apply early. We close applications after all awards have been allocated. So don't forget to follow us on social media, sign up for our newsletter, subscribe to our platforms so you're in the know and you are up to date with all that's happening here at Citizens NYC. Thank you so much again for joining us today, and take care.